Yay. Are we ready? Should I go?
You're 5 minutes late.
Oh, I am? Okay, cool. 7 minutes late, great. Okay, cool. So I don't really have a lot of slides, so that's great. Okay, so Bob's Adventures in Chemo, yay. So who am I? Whatever. That jaded security asshole on Twitter. Have a podcast, Grumpy Sec, coming up on almost 15 years in the industry. I started on the offense side, so I think a little bit differently than some of the people that started in IT and became security guys, which is weird, right? Whatever. I'm sure you really don't care. So, disclaimer. This is based on theory. None of this has ever happened. Some of the things that could potentially happen, I guess. So Bob is a fictional character. I'm not Bob. Absolutely not Bob. And I in no way take credit for anything Bob's done. And if you hate bitstrips, get up and leave now. I hate bitstrips personally, but unfortunately, because of the topics of the talk, there really are. Let's just say there wasn't a statement. Are we recording this? Because I actually asked them to not, but it's cool. It's cool. I've censored it to the point where it's cool.
I want a video of this.
Whatever, bro. Okay. So if you hate bitstrips, get up and leave now then, I guess. So a couple years ago, Bob was diagnosed with cancer. Nobody's dying. You can still hire him. He's cool. Don't flip out, whatever. Bob had a biopsy, saw an oncologist, got a PET scan, started antibody treatments, same thing that I guess everyone goes through when they get cancer. But Bob got a little annoyed. Bob tried to get his medical records so he can get a second opinion. And the hospital made this almost impossible. It's Bob's records. Bob doesn't, it's weird. Bob signed off on, hey, I'm going to get my treatment here. I want my records. But apparently that didn't work out for Bob. So after a dozen back and forth conversations, Bob figured he'd take it into his own hands. Right? It's cool. So after a dozen back and forths, Bob, I just said that. So let's start off with, this isn't to talk about healthcare.gov. We've all looked at, so robots.txt is fucking hilarious. After Kennedy went online and started talking about him, I didn't give a shit because I work for a company, so I got my insurance covered. I don't have to worry about buying insurance out of pocket. But I started looking at their site, and it's pretty cool. Right? That's some cool stuff up there. Searching for user ID on Google Dorking user ID site, healthcare.gov, gives you almost every single person's information. Isn't that cool? And they leave shit like this up. This is actually really on their site right now. Isn't that awesome? That's cool. Whatever.
What is that?
I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. It's some kind of test thing. I don't know. They never took it off, and yeah, site went live. It's cool. Healthcare.gov. Great. So HIPAA. We're going to talk a little about HIPAA. I know how to spell it, unlike some security consultants in our industry that do HIPAA consulting. I have a little bit of background in HIPAA. I actually built out the practice at Sprint when I was with Paranet, 12 years ago, 13 years ago at this point, when they were still thinking that this would be a cool idea and we'd implement some security around patient information. HIPAA privacy rule provides federal protections for individually identifiable health information, blah, blah, blah. So they need to keep your PHI safe. They don't need to, they need to be able to only disclose it to parties that are responsible for it and that have a need to know. So HIPAA actually has a couple different components. They have the privacy rule, they have the security rule. They also have Omnitech and high-tech now for reporting, but it's essentially a CYA type thing. We'll get into why HIPAA compliance doesn't necessarily mean security for your PHI in a few minutes. Covered entities. So HIPAA, healthcare.gov actually isn't a covered entity. They don't have any patient information, so there's no reason for them to be HIPAA compliant, which is great. So some of us in the security industry that say they're not HIPAA compliant, they don't have to be. They have no charter to be. They don't fall under any of these verticals. They're not a healthcare provider, they're not a health plan, and they're not really a healthcare clearinghouse. All they do is put you in touch with the insurance companies. In terms of healthcare provider, almost everybody that you visit does need to be HIPAA compliant to some degree for PHI. PHI is your personally identifiable health information. So in terms of if you are a covered entity, essentially, anytime you go see a physician, they need to be covered. There was a cool little loophole back in 2002, 2003 when I first started this. If they didn't do any ERP, electronic, or any electronic record processing, they didn't have to be compliant. Unfortunately, now all the insurance companies require it. So everybody does technically, if you are a provider, you technically do have to be HIPAA compliant, which is great. Not that that's protecting your not that that's protecting your PHI or protecting your data, but it is essentially providing some mandate for them to implement security controls. So I love this little icon, this little graphic. I don't remember where I found it, but HIPAA essentially doesn't ensure the privacy of your protected information. It's a CYA across the board in all verticals within healthcare. And it does get to a point where Bob was a little bit frustrated, where Bob couldn't get his own medical records, which kind of sucks, right? From a security perspective, HIPAA requires each entity to perform a risk analysis. And we all know from the offense side, if you've done risk assessment work before, risk assessment work is it's very discretionary based upon who does the assessment. It has nothing to actually do with the risk that you endure. If you are hiring a third party, they don't know about some of the business processes that you have in place. So their risk assessment might not be the same as a good risk assessment from an internal entity that actually knows some of the risks that your organization goes through. And one of the interesting factors within HIPAA that most controls are addressable and not required, which means that it's based on the individual entity and not the there's no real government mandate. Obviously, I put some of the fine print up there. I'm not going to go into each of the standards, but there are some inconsistencies in what can be addressed and what needs to be addressed. What are required controls? So, addressable versus required. I'm not going to go into fine print, obviously, but as you see, it's like same as almost all other regulations. Compliance regulations are great, but they don't necessarily implement any bit of security into the environment. There are still things that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that it doesn't address, and especially when we're concerned about our private health data. There's a lot of things that it's up to the discretion of the individual provider. So security standards, general rules, ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all electronic protected health data. So that's the PHI. Compliance doesn't equal security, right? We all know this. I'm sure either if we're on the offense side or on the defense side, we all see that compliance and security are not synonymous. There are ways to be compliant without being actually secure, without securing confidential data. So enough of the boring stuff. Now we get into some of the fun stuff that there will be a lot of bit strips. There will be a lot of stuff that I really shouldn't be talking about. Bob did a lot of this outside of a statement of work. So this was a pen test that really wasn't authorized, but Bob did it anyway, because Bob had an idea. Bob figured that, okay, Bob can't get his PHI by asking for it or filling out hundreds of forms to get his own medical records. So he figured next time he'd be at the doctor's office, he'd look at it a little bit, right? Bob's a pen tester. Bob can figure things out real quick. Bob thinks outside the box. So in terms of boundaries, Bob set up his own statement of work. In terms of scope, no active attacks. He's not going to go after any vulnerabilities. He's not going to go after anything that would be included in this typical statement of work. All passive monitoring, things that he could look at, things that should have been covered by risk assessment. No Metasploit, we're not going to get any shells. We could, we won't. There's no real reason to. Evaluating physical security issues at multiple buildings at a multiple building campus. So the hospital in question, and to preface all this, they have been notified. There has been a couple of anonymous complaints, and there will be an anonymous HIPAA complaint following. eventually. But there have been no active attacks. So it's the same thing as just walking into a building and just looking at some of the things that are available. Evaluating common practices of healthcare providers. Because this was a multi-facility campus, there were over 14 different buildings with three major campuses. And as part of this, because Bob didn't want to get weaved, Bob didn't, I'm hoping everybody knows what that is. I don't have to get into that. I see Casey laughing. Whatever. No PHI would be exfiltrated from the organization, which is very important. Bob didn't want to violate anyone's personal privacy. Bob just wanted to see what he could get, if he could potentially get his own data without having to fill out 100 forms. So let's get into the fun stuff. Reception's great, right? I started as a pen tester. So when I walk into a facility and when Bob walks into a facility, we see all sorts of things that nobody ever thinks about. So if this particular organization had gone through a risk assessment, they really shouldn't have let their receptionist plug in her iPhone to a machine that has full access to PHI. Just thought. Her iPhone's plugged in. And it's funny because you don't see it in the image here, but the monitor is actually blocking the console. Bob could have stuck a Tinsy in there and it would have been great, right? Done. Common access, no security guard stopped him. He walked in and everything would have been great. And if it was a pen tester, gone, we're done, cool, it's over. I got a shell. Of course, I don't consider a pen test a shell, but you have a shell access to a machine now that has full access to everyone's PHI. Everyone who's signed on to the hospital, everyone who's walked into the door, every medical record in that facility is now accessible. It's cool, right? This took all of 30 seconds. Bob didn't actually have to do anything for this. It's great. But we'll move on because this isn't a pen test, right? Let's just look at everything they have because it's fun. So the network infrastructure, hospital staff only. It was actually called staff only. The Wi-Fi access point was called staff only. Cool, right? But they had a guest network with a cool little portal that gave you access. Whatever, it's WPA, it's safe. Creds achieved. So now I got full access. Now Bob has full access to the production environment. That's cool, right? Whatever, let's go on. So the organization actually did do some due diligence on their wireless network, and most of the applications that supported PHI did use some level of SSL, which is cool. SSL safe, right? Whatever. Bob does have boundaries, even though there's no real statement of work. Bob did commit himself to, we're not going to do any active attacking, so no man in the middle, no whatever, no decrypting. It's cool. I'm not seeing any PHI. That's great. So following that, Bob gets sent to the waiting room to wait for blood work. What do you know? There's an RJ45 that's available in the reception area. No security guard, no, that's cool, right? It was actually, from my conversation with Bob, it was right behind that end table. That's cool. There's a power outlet there too, so that works wonders. Bob could sit there and plug in his laptop, but that would cause a little bit of a stir. If only there was a way. These Raspberry Pis are great. One of the things that's really cool about this scenario, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later, they can actually sit on 2 networks. So, I don't know, exfil through the wireless and plugged into the wired, that's cool, right? Power is not a problem. So it turns out at this particular facility, there was absolutely 0 SSL on the corporate network. 0, none. All of the apps that had PHI were essentially not secured. Bob did see some SSL for auth, but that's cool, right? You only need to use SSL for authentication, not to actually send data back and forth. It's internal network, it's cool. No issues. Whatever, it's cool. Exfil anyone? So essentially, this, if I was Bob, I'm sorry, did someone?
So what? They were running repeaters on this thing?
I'm sorry?
They're running repeaters, not routers?
What do you mean?
So the packets come
I could sniff the network because, well, Bob could sniff the network. We need to record it, change that recording. Bob could sniff the network because the RJ45 that was plugged into the shared area in the waiting room was on their corporate network.
Wasn't it on the switch?
What do you mean on the switch?
Meaning that the individual heating house traffic would not cross that port.
Okay, so we can take a step back. Switch security was cool 15 years ago. We all know how to use EtherCAT, and ARP spoofing is not a big deal. But yeah, it was on the switch. It was on the switch, but it was a flat network. If that's what you're asking. Yeah, there wasn't domain separation in the waiting room that there should have been. Actually, I'm not really sure why that port was even active, to be honest with you. Bob could have disconnected that IP phone and tried that. Bob didn't have to do that. There was a second port. That is an IP phone. Yeah, right? Right? Isn't that cool? HIPAA says this is cool. But the IP phone wasn't on the same segment. The IP phone was not on the same segment. Bob did not unplug the IP phone. IP phones are great because that's where your NAC gets defeated completely, right? NAC is cool. I've never seen a NAC implementation that hasn't been beat up because of IP phones. Or whatever, any other device. Not every device is NAC compliant. It's cool.
My experience with hospital waiting rooms is
I'm sorry?
My experience with hospital waiting rooms is that plugging in your laptop is a perfectly routine thing that everybody's seen. Plugging in your laptop is perfectly routine. Everybody's seen it. Would have gotten.
Oh, agreed. 10 years ago. Now they have Wi-Fi for the same access. I agree with you.
Yeah, but I mean, plugging the power for your laptop.
Not power, yes. Walking around with an RJ45 cable and plugging into someone's network probably isn't the best thing to do. Not that we as consultants, I'm sure there's enough consultants here that, hey, I'm at the client side, I'm just going to plug into their network. That's cool, right? Yeah. NAC is useless. Like anyone who implements NAC that's cool. You needed to spend some money, that's cool. I've never seen a NAC implementation that works. I really haven't. I've been doing this a long time from the defense on the offense side. I've never seen a NAC application that actually works. Oh, as a disclaimer, I also drink and curse.
Is that moonshine?
This isn't moonshine, this is vodka today. It's vodka today. So instead of Bob plugging in his laptop, he might have plugged in the Raspberry that had some custom code on it. It's cool. He did set boundaries, so there was no active pen testing of any kind. We didn't do any type of shells. We aren't no ARP spoofing. It was a flat network. It was a flat, all it did was TCP dump, that's it. So yeah, is anyone familiar with Yassi? So Yassi is a really cool tool. Yassi will go out there and it will map the local network and essentially index every file that it finds via SMB, HTTP, HTTPS, anything that it finds open. If you're on a pen test and you have DA, Yassi, and DA is easy, right? We're not even going to get into how easy it is to get DA. However, DA was outside the scope of this, but getting DA is not easy. Getting DA is fairly easy. If you have Yassi with DA, you own every company. Like I'm pretty personally fed up with pen testers that are like, okay, cool, I can get shell. Okay, how does that hurt me?
Do you have a hard disk to store all this shit?
I don't have to have a hard disk. I'm connected to, Bob was connected to the wireless segment at the same time. Do we have exfil on here? I thought I had an exfil slide, I did. Yeah, so that's how exfil works, folks. There's a lot of ways to exfil data. If Bob actually wanted to make this hospital hurt, he could have made this hospital hurt. There's a lot of ways to exfil data. Raspberry plugged into the wired and the guest, that's cool, right? I think that's cool. Cloud instances are cheap. You can get a cloud instance for like $2. And they take Bitcoin. Winning. But yeah. There was no, because there was no statement of work and because this was all, Bob just wanted to see how many health records he can get because he couldn't get his own apparently. There's no way to get his own without going through hundreds of phone calls. And Bob just wanted to have another doctor look at his records, so Bob got a little annoyed. And Bob figured out that HIPAA is stupid. We all know compliance isn't security. Anybody that works in a financial or a healthcare, anyone who's got regulatory requirements, we all know that checking boxes is cool, but it doesn't lock anything down. It doesn't lower your risk by any means. PCI, I'm a fan of PCI because they can say, hey, you know what? Fuck you. We're not taking credit cards. We're not going to let you take credit cards anymore. If you violate GLB or violate SOX or HIPAA, okay, cool. Here's a fine. Keep working. I headed up security for a financial in New York that their SOP was, we're just going to pay fines. We don't really give a shit about security. That's cool. We make enough money where it doesn't matter. We took trades over IM. Instant messenger. How do you validate that? That's cool, right? And this was before the whole WorldSec, we own the internet type thing. That was before you can hit paste and forget all sorts of user IDs and passwords. That's great, yeah. So like I said, if Bob was on the pen test, winning. This would be the end of a pen test for most consultants. Like, I know some of the companies out there, I know you guys don't admit it, but this would be the end of the pen test. Hey, I got shell on the receptionist machine, that's cool, right? No, we're gonna move on. So, Python is your friend. So Bob wrote a quick script on these Raspis that anytime it was running TCP dump and listening to just traffic on the wire, not doing any type of active attacks, if it saw a combination of patient, ID, social, name, address, any of these cool things that we consider PHI or PII, personally identifiable information or personal health information, we think it's a PHI record, right? It's safe to say, right? If it's in one line on a TCP dump, I'm guessing that it's safe. So if any two were found in the same field, it would just send one to the cloud instance listening. Because we didn't want to exfil any data. We could, but Bob didn't want to go to jail. Bob just wanted to see, you know, it took him so long to get his personal records, how easy would it be to get other people's records? So as of right now, and there's no slide for this because I wasn't thinking this was going to be recorded, there's 4,100 plus records. So there were 6 Raspis dropped, 3 are still reporting. It's been 6 months. Whatever. So Bob got bored. He's already got full network access. He's going to be spending a lot of time getting chemo. So let's start playing with other things. Let's see what else is cool, right? That's an electrical closet with the door opened. Nobody stopped Bob as he walked around the building just like, cool, I'm just going to walk around. There might or might not be a Raspi in that room. Maybe. Maybe. It's still online. So according to risk assessment, all this shit's cool, right? Because it's discretionary based on the person who performed the assessment. And yay, winning. Another reason I'll never work for healthcare, because I just, cool. Patient rooms. Patient rooms are fun. There's a lot of stuff in there. And they tend to leave you there for a while, unattended, right? That's cool. Nothing to see here that's not a Raspberry plugged into your network in someone's bag. So this particular facility went all wireless for their mobile workstations. Please explain to me why there's any wired segments left. Why is that wired port still available? And if you happen to notice that cable right there, that's the Raspberry plugged in. It's still there. It's still there. That's bad. I'm not really sure. I don't even know how to excuse this. Like, HIPAA does have.
What is the physical form factor of the Raspberry that it's still there and nobody's noticed?
So this one actually is in a case. Here's a Raspberry right here. Thank you, BayThreat for providing Raspberries as speaker gifts, because Bob might still have a few left at the hospital. They're about this big. Yeah. So this one was left under this desk.
Cable to the bare raspy.
Cable to the bare raspy, but okay, I get it. You want to know about power. I get it. That's cool. No, that's cool. Wait. No. Oh, it had that little plastic thing on it. It was in a case. It was in a little Adafruit case. It's under the table and that's it. Nurses are stupid. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Yeah. We're not gonna talk about the RFID cards that were maybe lifted. Maybe. So you want to know about power for these Raspbies, right? That's important. So these mobile workstations, they're great, right? They lock them and they want to prevent the console from being, attacked, like people plugging shit in and stuff. But you might not notice here. Maybe you do. I have a better image. USB extension. I can get power from there, right? Bob can definitely get power from there. That's a better picture of it. So if you're going to lock the console to prevent someone from plugging someone in, you probably don't want to use a USB extension cable. Just me. I'm not smart, but I think this is a bad idea. But this is HIPAA compliant. It's cool. That's awesome. So enough with the fail. I know you want to know what else can Bob do. So Bob technically has full access to the hospital, right? That's cool. Chemo's hard. Takes forever. Really, really slow rate. So unfortunately, that for your first bag of chemo, depending on the cancer, could take up to 10 hours. 10 hours of free time in the hacker's hands, you don't want to take that chance. You really don't. So, anyone seen these IV drips before in a hospital? Passwords hit enter twice. So if Bob really wanted to, speed up his chemo treatment, he could have done that. It only took Bob about 30 seconds to figure out how to navigate the menu. It's cool, right? HIPAA protects you. Yeah. Winning. So Bob didn't want to kill himself. That was one of Bob's goals, that whatever Bob does, he's not going to try to kill himself. However, if you wanted to kill someone else, you can buy those on Amazon for like $20. It's cool, right? No problems. HIPAA is awesome. So this was a fun one. So apparently the barcodes that they use on wristbands, they're vulnerable to SQLi. So if you happen to have a printer in your car, which Bob does, just print your own real quick and throw an apostrophe S in there. It would be great. Obviously, Bob couldn't find one on eBay to figure out what else he could do. However, an apostrophe S did quick crash the app. That's cool, right? We don't need to validate printers, right? That's awesome. You should have seen the look on their face. Bob told me. She was like, what the fuck? What the? The machine crashed about 12 times, and then she keyed it in. It's great, right? It's cool. But seriously, who needs passwords? So Bob told me that, he was in the room for probably about 30 minutes with an unlocked workstation by himself. Why go through any of the hassle that Bob did before? Right? It's pointless when you have full access to the machine. That's Windows XP, folks. Reverse shell takes about 30 seconds. Winning? Anybody? Cool, right? Clearly, there's a label on it that says staff use only. That's going to protect them. Yeah. So had this been an actual pen test, the hospital would have been owned. Several backdoors have been dropped. 3 are still reporting. PHI, whatever. And I remember the last time I checked, it was like $5,000 fine for each record. That's not a lot, right? That's not a physical risk to the hospital, right? Because they'll get tax reimbursements to fix that. PHI would be the attackers for taking. No, Bob wouldn't have had to sign any forms to get any of his data. And the facility is HIPAA compliant. Winning. That's essentially it. There's a lot more that I really couldn't talk about because Bob didn't have a statement of work for this pen test. But Bob did report all this stuff to the hospital, so we'll see what comes out of that. But yeah, that's essentially it. 30 minutes. I thought I could pull like 40. That's cool. Questions?
Bob report the fact that there are still physical devices on site.
Bob did. But Bob didn't tell them where they are.
But there are still
There are still 3 physical devices on the site reporting back to a cloud server through their wireless guest network. That Bob reported. They're not exfilling data, right? So there's no real legal implications. They're not exfilling data. However, if Bob decided to exfil data, it wouldn't be a problem. Yep. So some of the cool things are, because they're flat network implementation, billing is on the same segment. If Bob wanted to do some ID theft, Bob could really do some ID theft fairly quickly. That's great, right? Oh, and some of their, give me one second, I'm sorry. Some of their internal apps require Java 623. Go ahead.
Not consider arc poisoning an active attack?
There was no arc poisoning performed. It was a flat network.
A flat network?
Flat network.
Are you saying that all packets transmitted on the wired network?
All on the wire. Flat network. There was no arc poisoning.
Everywhere on the network?
From that point of plugging, yes. It was not a switch network. So the 6 pies were, the 3 pies have probably been there for 4.5 months. Yes, ARP spoofing is an active attack, but there were no active attacks in this. Bob sets boundaries. Bob has ethics. Because this is where HIPAA fails. No, it's a failure in the standard itself, because HIPAA requires, most things under HIPAA are addressable and not required. The only thing really required of a HIPAA assessment is that whoever the douchebag is that you hired to be your CISO to do a risk assessment. And we all know how many cool people we have in our industry. Anything else? There are things I can talk about. You just have to ask them. Go ahead.
Did Bob ever get a copy of his records?
Bob did eventually get a copy of his records, yes.
Legally?
Yes, legally. Legally. Although Bob might have also, when that machine was open, Bob might have grabbed everything as well. Go ahead.
But did you see any payment or other operations data?
Billing was on the same segment as that waiting room machine. So it might not have been a flat network from what Bob had told me, but some of the Raspis were seeing data that other Raspis weren't, but billing data was definitely involved. Wow. Right? Right? And this is every hospital. This is every hospital.
Presumably it's every hospital.
No, it's every hospital.
How many beds was this particular hospital?
How many what?
How many beds?
15 buildings. So it's a pretty big Northern California facility.
My experience with hospital networking is about 5 years old, but it seems there are difficulties in developing hospital applications because most of them are developed for the model that says there's a computer in the basement and all the apps run on computers in the basement in order to go up and downstairs. There are, on the other hand, some hospitals that are in a model where they're nationally federated.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely cloud systems, and however, at that point, if Bob really was an attacker, because there are obviously several ways to get physical access to their corporate network, SSL decryption would be easy, right? No, this was all in-house. One of the things that I didn't put in the presentation, which I'm still amazed that it actually happened. There was telnet to a couple of Cisco switches, core switches. Whatever. Yeah. Some of the, yeah. It's wired. It's safe. That's cool.
Entirely not worked on the good side of one of these hospital things. That it's really difficult for them to take 5,000 applications in a typical.
Oh no, totally. However, so here's where my perspective changes. I started doing a ton of HIPAA consulting when HIPAA was just like Bill Clinton's dream, and like he had a wet dream one night and like, cool, we're gonna do this, right? So HIPAA hasn't changed much since. It's more of a CYA than anything else.
I get called occasionally on medical embedded jobs. And the typical scenario is that they've got an existing device, kidney machine or whatever, and they want to add connectivity to it.
Sure. Like SCADA. That's cool.
Occasionally they have existing connectivity using RS-232. So what they want is they want something either Ethernet, wireless, or USB.
That's great, but it's the same as SCADA. It always goes to default default 232, RS-232.
And that's the problem. If your software is based on the model that we've got a remote
Sure.
monitoring station that runs over RS-232, even if it's physically using, IP4, it doesn't matter because the software thinks it's an RS-232.
Agreed. That's great. However, the right way to do it would split that off to a management network, and maybe isolate it somehow. I've been on defense for probably about 3 years now. I was heavy on the offense side, so when I walk into an environment, I think Bob thinks completely differently than most people. So when and that's why I think I provide the value add on the defense side, because when I build defense infrastructure, I don't care if the regulation says this or if your threat model that you pulled out of your ass says this. I know how to do a proper threat model, and if HIPAA is based completely on the discretionary risk assessment of the CISO at the time, you're fucked. You're fucked. All of our data is free for the taking. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Not really. It was just mainly a comment about the mentality.
I'm sorry, did you have something?
I was wondering if Bob encountered any other actors for
If Bob what?
Have you encountered anybody else out there?
In the same facility?
It sounded pretty wide open.
Bob didn't dive that far deep. However, in my experience and Bob's experience, most attackers would be external. But from this perspective, just looking at that, just the fact that the receptionist could plug her iPhone into her phone, they're owned. Bob would be willing to sign off on the fact that the hospital is owned, without a doubt. Zero doubt in my mind that someone has root access to everything that they own. It's cool, right? Bob's Chemo was over $150,000. It's cool. Maybe Bob will change that.
That Bob didn't have to unplug someone's phone plug, put in his Raspberry.
Bob didn't have to do that, no. But and that's just it. From the security perspective, right? Coming as an external party, if I walk into a shared area and you have an RJ45 available, even if there's a sign that says don't plug in, that's cool. Let me see what's on there. And here's another cool fact. Bob didn't use a laptop for anything. All of Bob's stuff was with either a Raspberry or a rooted Android. It's cool. Bob's red team bag is about that big. Yay. No locks were picked, no shells were gotten. Yay. Go ahead. I'm sorry?
There are much less intrusive looking Raspberry cases out there than those
Shiny clear.
Oh, agreed. Totally. Forget Raspies. Bob could have done this with Tinsies. Forget Raspies. Bob could have done this with Tinsies. When Bob saw the receptionist plug her iPhone in and she couldn't see the USB ports because her monitor was in front of him. Bob had some ideas, but Bob promised himself he would be good. It's cool. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Maybe.
occasionally.
Sure.
Have you noticed has Bob noticed any of these Raspies going offline for a while and then going back online as if they were thoroughly cleaned?
So the Raspies that have gone offline were connected to the mobile workstations. So Bob's assumption is that the mobile workstations were moved somewhere to another room. Those are the only ones that have gone offline. The ones in shared spaces are all still there. They haven't dropped off, no. That's cool, right? That's cool. If you want to offer free wireless to your customers, just make sure that they're not doing anything bad. There is absolutely no reason on free guest Wi-Fi that you should allow SSH. There's none. Not that Bob couldn't have gotten around it. However, there's absolutely zero reason to allow SSH on a Wi-Fi portal. That's cool. You know, because SSH doesn't have reverse shell capability, right? Anything else? I can talk about this all day. I love this. Thanks, guys.